The decision of the Senate to slam a 3-month suspension on Senator Abdul Ningi representing Bauchi Central has continued to generate controversy, with many notable lawyers in the country kicking against the action of the Senate. Senator Ningi was suspended over his interview on a foreign broadcaster, alleging that 3.7 trillion naira cannot be accounted for properly in terms of specific projects in the 2024 budget. Now, seasoned lawyers like Mike Ozekome, SAN, and Abdul Mahmoud, SAN, have all faulted the Senate, saying the action it took against Ningi violates his freedom of speech and that the Senate has no business sitting as a judge in its own case. Now, to many other organizations like SERAP, who have headed to the court to challenge the suspension of Senator Ningi, the action of the Senate seems to suggest that the upper legislative chamber was much more bitter at Senator Ningi's revelation for allegedly opening its can of worms. Well, to help us understand the issues, we have joining us right now in the studio a former commissioner in the Delta State Oil Producing Area Development Commission, the SOPADEG, who must thank you so much for joining us. And Kenny Okolugbo is joining us right here in our studio. And of course, joining us right here is public affairs analyst Dixon Iroegbu. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, so let me start from you, Kenny. I mean, what do you make of this issue, this suspension that is already generating uproar, and then of course the Senate's decision to actually talk about how these projects have been accounted for according to it? But here we have the senator saying that it's only 25 trillion naira budget that was fully accounted for, and the remaining 3.7 trillion wasn't fully accounted for. While of course the Senate leadership is saying he was part of the passing of the budget. How could he have said that there was no accountability for the 3.7 trillion naira?
Well, if you look at it from two perspectives, one, Abdul Ningi is a member of the appropriation committee. You can't be a member of a committee and you condemn the process of the committee. If I remember very well, if I have to look at it very objectively, the medium-term expenditure framework came first to the National Assembly, and the fiscal under the fiscal strategy paper, FSP, which also came to the National Assembly. And as at that time, it was 27.5 trillion. Everybody knew that that was what came to the National Assembly. So if it came during the medium-term expenditure framework, which you all know that is when you review and you project the performance of a budget, that was at a material point in time. He could have spotted if there was actually a 25 trillion a 2.5 trillion difference as at then. Yeah. So if you didn't spot it at when the medium-term expenditure framework came, how could you then have spotted it when the final budget came? Because when the final budget came, I remember very well, some of us for me, I was wondering how they were going to be able to implement 27.5 trillion at an exchange rate of 750. For me, it was the exchange rate that was unrealistic in my own view of the budget. And it was proven, because eventually it went to 800 naira to $1. That was what the Senate took it to, and that was why it eventually went to 1.2 trillion. That took it to 28 trillion 700 billion. Now, if you look at it from another perspective, Ningi could easily have brought it up not in the committee of the whole, but when before the appropriation committee, if there were actual findings and lapses that had been done in passing the budget. But he said he had approached the Senate president and had mentioned that he had concerns over some repetitions that had taken place. Budget appropriation is a law. Most people don't even seem to understand that it's a law, and you must follow it diligently. So if you have repetitions, those are very serious cases that have to be cured, and there are ways to cure it. But when you make a sweeping statement that 3.7 trillion, we're not talking about billion, which some states, which you can combine some states in the north, maybe 3, 4, 5, or 6 to have their budget of the year, are not having any budgetary head, or you are operating two budgets.
Yeah,
there's no way.
Government-owned enterprises.
Yes, there is
no explanation. Just one line.
And you know, by the fact that interview was granted to BBC, which we all know, the Hausa service, one of the most popular, all over the world that people listen to, all across Africa and sub-Saharan Africa and in the world. It's marks of the fact that you were actually trying to stir the hornet's nest, because there were ways I thought he could go about it. And if you look at Section 60 of our Constitution, it empowers the Senate to regulate itself. Section 101 empowers the houses of assembly to regulate themselves. So I believe if I was a senator, there is no way I would not have felt, offended by that interview.
All right, yes. And I bring you, Dixon Iroegbu. We're actually here to take a look at the political aspect of it, the suspension. And then, of course, lawyers are kicking and saying that, look, the Senate doesn't have a power to actually suspend a member. The way they had taken the decision that, look, that constituencies or senatorial district will not be represented in the next 3 months. And these people are all elected the same way. The Senate president, regardless of his position, is elected just like any other senator. What do you make of that submission?
But that's very valid, because the constitution of the land is, that's our Quran, that's our Bible. Right, whatever is written there is final. And it states clearly that if any group of people, whether even the Senate, have rules that contradicts the content of the Constitution, it doesn't exist. These people were elected by the Constitution of the land to represent their people. So that, he had a meeting with the Senate president with his group. He was leading the Northern Senators Forum at that time. Right, they went to have this meeting because they, according to them, had some specialist or professional or whatever that investigated and found out this.
Yeah, consultant.
Yeah, consultant. Yeah. Ningi, yeah, and found out these observations. And then before then, he had an interview on BBC. It's not like it was after that meeting with the Senate president that he went for the interview. No, the interview had happened. And then if you listened to the interview, I understand Hausa fluently, and clearly he was speaking as a northerner, which he is. He was also speaking as an opposition member of the Red Chamber, which he is. And if he finds fault in what the government of the day, the ruling party, has issue with the budget, why won't he escalate it in the media? He has a right to that. So for me, I think sincerely the approach of the Senate, suspending Senator Ningi, for me is way beyond what it should be. Yeah, they can have their banter. They can have even a closed door or executive session and tell themselves whatever truth they wanted, but not for them to now denying a senatorial district in Nigeria an opportunity to defend itself and fend for itself in the Senate. It is wrong, I think, sincerely.
Well, the Bauchi State governor, who used to be a senator to himself, Bala Mohammed, says he backs his senator. Yes.
And he should.
I think it was only natural that he would say.
Yeah. But now let's talk about the senior lawyers who are saying that the Senate was sitting as a judge in its own case in an allegation against its own leadership. What do you make of that?
Okay, but you remember when Omo Agege was suspended, he went to court and Dingba was clear. He said Omo Agege was suspended because he went to challenge at that time, if you remember, it was the order of election that Omo Agege complained about, and that it was Omo Agege's fundamental human rights for him to have gone to court, and there was no way you could be suspending Omo Agege for 90 days. So the examples that they've given, Ndume too, you remember his suspension?
Yeah, when
eventually. So if we can go on and on about those examples, but the lawyers that are talking about are going under Order 67, Rule 4 of the Senate, which clearly says that you can only suspend for 14 days. But that 14 days, there's a lacuna. And I believe that lacuna is where the 90 days is, or more than 90 days, it was able to be brought up on the Senate floor. But if you have watched the proceedings clearly that day, the senators were very ready not to suspend Ningi. They only wanted an apology from him. And even when they went ahead to suspend him, they still gave that room that if an apology later comes, we will resign that suspension. Yes, Nigerians are a bit bitter. Times are very hard. Today, inflation is at 31.7. That's the highest we have ever had in the history of this country since 1996. Unemployment is very high. So there is no way you can expect Nigerians to get 3.7 trillion. They don't want to go into that fact. They don't want to know what the law is saying. The lawyers are saying, look, the Senate at this material point in time are trying to use a sledgehammer to kill a fly. But the senators, as it is now, if you notice, Akpabio has been trending for almost 3 weeks as #1 on Twitter.
Yeah.
And there is no way. And it's funny because the House of Rep is also supposed to be part of the appropriation bill, but nobody is calling Abbas.
Exactly.
Are you understanding where it's coming from? So it's as if there's a targeted missile towards Akpabio's seat. Because why are they not calling Abbas? The 1.2 trillion that was added to the budget was not only done by the Senate. It was a combination of the House of Rep and the Senate. We run a bicameral system of legislation in Nigeria. But with what has been happening in Nigeria is as if it is unicameral. It's been Akpabio. I mean, you must understand where I'm coming from.
That's a political angle that I want to
yes, you must understand where I'm coming from.
And the allegations are that he actually put a lot of projects in his area, in his constituency, in the senatorial district.
Outrageous figures.
Outrageous figures. People just want explanation. And so the other leg of it is that Senator Solomon Adiola in the Senate actually said that, look, this is targeted at Senator Akpabio to actually remove him from that position as Senate President, because over the years, we've seen Southern senators always having problem when they become Senate presidents. But when it becomes a Northern senator becoming a Senate president, that you see calm and you see cooperation from Southern senators. And during the week, we also saw the revival of the Southern Senators Forum. Talk to us. What do you understand? Is it a North-South thing that these allegations have been turned to?
Well, first of all, Nigeria came into existence by Northern and Southern Protectorate. So it's a North and South thing. However, I wish the North and South engagement now were for the interest of the people. It's not. They're not discussing the interest of the people. The insecurity, our children were kidnapped, people are being killed, and all of that. Poverty, acute hunger in the land. That's not what they are doing. That's not what caused this brouhaha in the house, right? Because the hunger is ravaging both the North and the South. The insecurity is ravaging both the North and the South. So let's not take it away that, yes, indeed, it's a North and South thing. But however, that was not the case here. The case here is that the man in question, that is Senator Ningi, who is the actor, the key actor in this whole, because it's not particularly Akpabio. Yes, if there are allegations against the Senate President, he should clear himself. Right, but here, where the sledgehammer has applied is on Senator Ningi. For me, I think is more like targeted at stifling the views or the voice of the opposition. That's my view. It's my view. That action they took is more like to intimidate the opposition in the country and run a one-party state in our country, and that won't work.
No, but I don't think it's. I don't think it's opposition. You know, because the minority leader, who happens to be the head of, your minority leader is in PDP. Ningi is in PDP.
I get that
He
point.
totally condemns Ningi.
No.
His words were even stronger.
The official statement from PDP is that they stood with Ningi.
You can't be talking about PDP as a party. Talk about PDP as a minority party.
How can you not talk about the party and discuss an individual who probably has gotten his interest settled and he's speaking? But that's the truth. That's what they
What you're saying is that Ningi has no respect for his minority leader.
How?
Because minority leader is Abamoro, who is a member of PDP. He totally condemned Ningi.
I have had a one-on-one with Senator Ningi. In fact, the day after that very suspension, I had a one-on-one, at least 45 minutes engagement with him. And he showed me even what caused the conflict. On their loop, their WhatsApp loop, that is the Northern Senators Forum. There was a post that was made by one Senator Kao from Kano.
Sumala Kao.
Now, but that post had Ningi signing it as the chairman
of the Northern Senators Forum.
And the content was not from Ningi. But the content that was posted was seen as signed by Senator Ningi as chairman of the forum. Now, that got to the other side, including the Senate President's table. And they now turned it against him, saying that, oh, there is a plot to impeach the state. Oh, what are they afraid of? If you're not performing, for goodness sake, there will be rules of this game. If you're not performing, you should be taken off the scene.
Yeah, but on the WhatsApp forum, Senator Ningi said he didn't write that.
He even said it on the floor.
And he said that on the floor.
And then that warranted him being suspended?
Yes, I mean, because the thing is, it has different angles, actually. Because if you look at the angle...
This is the real angle, really. This is the real angle.
Well, it depends on
the aspect of the Senate leader now, accusing him of plotting a civilian coup and all of that. You wonder what is all of that about?
Doing that.
When you hear somebody dancing, somebody is playing the drum.
Yeah, but there's always been that morbid fear. There's always been that morbid fear, actually, that when Southern senators become Senate president,
there's always a banana peel.
Yeah, and Senate Majority Leader Michael Okoyemi
yes,
was actually saying that, look, we need to take a look at that because Senator Akpabio hasn't completed a year yet. Yes. And there's a talk that before he will complete, I think June 13th, that they will remove him. Yes. But now let's take a look at what the Constitution actually says. When it comes to the issue of suspending a member, doesn't it look like the Senate is actually a lawbreaker here? Because the Section 88 of the 1999 Constitution, yes, which the Senate relies upon, actually says that, look, you need to turn these allegations to another arm of government to investigate. The Senate cannot sit as a judge in its own case.
But what
if it's a creation of the Constitution,
okay, but what of the same Constitution in Section 60 that says that they can regulate themselves, they can summon and they can go into recess? Section 60 is in conflict with Section 88. That's why I think that some of those lawyers who are very, very well vexed in these issues should call for an amendment. Because if you can't read Section 88 in isolation, if you read Section 60, it gives them the power to... So
there should be a community reading.
There will be a community reading to it. If you don't read it that way, you will say they cannot. Because I keep referring to Omar Gege's case. Omar Gege's case was different because first... Dingba felt 90 days was too punitive, and again, he didn't even feel that there should have been a suspension of Omar Gege at all. You understand? But the circumstances surrounding Omar Gege's suspension and that of Ningi now is different. A lot of lawyers have tried to bring the two together. So if they can amend the Constitution, then you can stop the Senate from being a judge in his own case. Because Section 60 already makes the Senate a judge in their own case. Who are they going to run to? They can only vote among themselves. If you remember in America, for example, Judge Santos was removed by the House of Reps. He was not suspended, even with the team majority between the Democrats and the Republicans. And you know the Republicans, because they want Trump to win the election, they need the House to continue to keep Biden in check. They could have kept Santos, but so many Republicans voted against Santos. And Santos was removed by the House of Reps in America. We're even talking of suspension here. We're not even talking of removal.
All right. So as we try to round off this conversation, let's talk about how we could actually have line items being presented by government and then without a breakdown. Well, the issue of having two budgets has been dispelled. In fact, even budget, which is a CSO that deals with that, said, look, Senator Ningi was wrong on having two budgets. But they also found out some aspects of his allegations to be true, which is for the fact that some government agencies just had a one-line item. Take, for example, 15 billion and no explanation. So how do you go about that?
It still now comes back to the current leadership in the land, because it's not enough to grab it. It's also about being able to unite the common interest of the Nigerian people. There are different political parties represented there in the Red Chamber. My fear is even why we're not hearing of the LP guys and other opposition members there. But I think, sincerely, with the approach, bringing it back to the Ningi thing, the approach to what happened at the Red Chamber and the eventual suspension of Ningi, for me, I think it sends a wrong signal that we must all speak up against. It's not enough to say, oh, he was wrong. If he was wrong, what is the right picture? You put the right picture out there, right? But they're saying, no, that what he said was not said inside the chamber. That's why he's not protected, because if he would have only gotten away with it if he was said in the chamber. So there was no parliamentary immunity outside of the chamber. That it was to a third party, the media now. But like I said, the Constitution of Nigeria empowers this individual to represent a people in that place. So if he has an opportunity to now speak for his people, he should not do it because you have some rules that contradicts the provisions in the Constitution. So I think, sincerely, the leadership of the land, President Tinubu needs to realize that if, like he said, I hope he means it, that campaign is over, governance now and about building, building the nation is what's on the table. I hope he will be deliberate first to make moves, show example. Don't tell us tighten your belt and then you're living larger than life, like a father who comes home to say to his children, oh no, that the condition of the land is terrible now. We won't eat 3 square meals anymore, we'll eat 2 now. But the kids accept, and then father, when coming back home, branches to one posh place there, enjoys himself, takes the best of champagne, and then he comes back home feeling that the children should tighten their belt. That's not what we're saying. The government should lead by example. And those in the parliament should also realize that They are there to speak for the people of Nigeria. In fact, this is a distraction away from the 400 children plus of our children that were taken.
That were 287.
All right.
So I think the lesson here,
Sokoto and Kaduna.
Okay. The lesson here is that what the Senate will have to do is to go back and put its house in order in terms of taking the appropriation committee must have a line-to-line reading of the budget again. Those duplications, first, the duplications are very key. You must do it without the duplications. And because we know it's a law, even though those are not monies that have been released yet, you must now ensure that you filter away those. For example, it's been trending on social media that 212 billion for 1,000, I think 456 street lights. Because of my experience in budgeting, I already know that 1,456 without asking means one can be 100 street lights, two can be 400 street lights. But the way they put that heading, a friend of mine sent it to me, it came to 184 million per pole. Nigerians will be livid.
Of course.
Do you understand? Nigerians will be livid.
Yeah, the purchase of freezers too, deep freezers and all of that.
184 million per pole of street lights when we can't eat 3 square meals a day.
It's madness.
There's no way you can justify that. So it should be also a lesson for the budget office, because we cannot only be talking about the appropriation committee here. The budget office still has a lot to do. We know those that have been in the budget office has been there since Buhari's time, and they were translated from Lagos. So we expect them to do a lot better than having those kind of headings. Those headings are not palatable, and it will not go down well with Nigerians.
All right, and just before we go in 30 seconds, the Senate has always had this credibility crisis when it comes to the issue of suspending fellow lawmakers that were actually elected like them. Don't forget, sometime around 1999, between that set, there was a time a former AIG of police actually stood in there and said that this Senate is peopled by a lot of criminals.
That's what they've been in himself.
Yeah, I mean, Senator Nuhu then and all of that is late now. And then that got a lot of senators angry and all of that. But when it got to court, the court actually says that, look, you don't have a right to actually go ahead and suspend him. You just refer him to somewhere. Shouldn't the Senate be thinking of always referring, maybe people who go wrong against it, to the police, for example? Atlanta Senator Jimoh Ibrahim also planning to write the Inspector General of Police to do this. So what's your last
No, but I don't think it should get to that extent. I think they should deal more with it in executive sessions. Okay. Executive sessions would have helped. But because this thing had already gone to the public, they just had to make it a committee of the whole. If you didn't make it a committee of the whole, if they didn't have Arise, for example, covering it live, and maybe some other stations covering it live, they would have said there was hanky-panky. So they needed at that time, I mean, there was... Oshimole summed it all up. He said they were
exposed themselves in public domain.
They were stripped naked in the public domain. So I think that is where, this is a lesson. Really,
so you insist that they shouldn't send it to external parties?
No, they should.
Referring it to the police if there's a criminal issue, for example. If you don't amend Section 60, you can't send it to external parties. You can refer to the police if you have a criminal, if you now find crime, because the Senate is not empowered to investigate crime. Well, Senator Jimoh Ibrahim said this is a criminal defamation. Lastly, from you, how do you see it? I mean, to prevent this kind of situation where even senior advocates are saying that, look, the Senate cannot continue to sit as a judge in its own case for lawmakers that were elected just like every other person, irrespective of whether you're presiding officer or not. What do you advise?
It comes with the credibility of the leadership. It's important to appreciate that democracy, especially at that level where they are, the red chamber, it allows for the opposition or the minority to have their say, while you, the majority, would have your way. So you don't, because you're the majority now, deny the opposition its voice, right? That's where we would now say, okay, we're running more like plutocracy, government of the rich and for the rich. I mean, that's what it actually seems to be. But what we have seen since 1999, why the red chamber continues to have these banana peels. But why is it particularly effective when the Southerner is the one in power?
In power, as Senate President, or maybe Speaker.
David Mark did 8 years, Saraki did 4 years, even with all the conflict between him and the president and the presidency. All right, there was still no issue of banana.
That's why the Southerners want to protect us.
But let them not also let them not also now turn Nigerians against each other. Let them clearly state it that it is within the opposition and the minority. That,
all right.
I mean, the ruling party and the minority that are engaging themselves in the election.
Thank you so much, Dixon Iroegbu. I mean, well, irrespective of whether the presiding officer is a northerner or a southerner, the thing is that if there's an infraction that's been committed, it should be dealt with according to the law books.
That's just...
That's a summary of all that you have said.
You just said it all.
And we must thank you so much, Dixon Iroegbu. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time. Dixon Iroegbu is a public affairs analyst, and he has helped us understand what's going on in the Senate and some of the steps to be taken. And of course, Kenny Okolugbo here is a former commissioner for the SOPADEC in Delta State, and he has also helped us to understand the intrigues within the budgeting system, and of course how the Senate should learn to deal with its own internal challenges, especially when members commit infractions.